Today I'm bringing up a message that I've actually delivered to the church back a few months ago in February. It was for Transfiguration Sunday. But it was important to me to have a record of this and to update it for what's been going on since February, since we all know there's been a lot going on since early February. So the story today is about Transfiguration Sunday. And there's two passages I'm going to read today. One is an Old Testament and New Testament version. New Testament will be very familiar. Old Testament's going to sound a lot like the New Testament version. So let me begin. From Exodus chapter 24, verses 12 through 18. And the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandments I have written for their instruction." Then Moses set out with Joshua on his side, and Moses went up the mountain of God. He said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we come back to you. Aaron and Hur are with you, and anyone involved in a dispute can go to them." So when Moses went up in the mountain, a large cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. For 6 days the cloud covered the mountain, and on the seventh day the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. To the Israelites the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. Then Moses entered the cloud, and he went up on the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. In the New Testament for Transfiguration Sunday, there's another mountain experience. There's similarities. And this comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 17, verses 1 through 9. So after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking to Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And while he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them all, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground and terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid. Let's go." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you had seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." And that's the word of the Lord. This little ditty, I like to call it, actually appears in all 4 Gospels. All 4 of them have it, so it must be an important story. I mean, the birth story is only in 2 of them, right? But this one's from Matthew, and I like Matthew for a couple of reasons. But let's look at these 2 passages for a second. And the first thing that comes to mind is being up on a mountaintop. And we know the term, a mountaintop experience. It's the one where something great happens. And on this mountaintop experience, although it was brief in both of them, this is where heaven and earth meet. This is where God talks to people. Apparently, the higher you go, the closer you are to God, physically even. And God is revealed in both of these stories. And Moses and Elijah are in the story, in the second story, New Testament story, but they've had their own mountaintop experiences themselves. I just read the one from Moses, and Elijah was on top of Mount Horeb. There was wind, there was earthquake, there were fires, and all of a sudden there was silence. And the Lord came to Elijah in that silent time. Now Matthew uses mountaintops a lot in his gospel. Like in the beginning, when Jesus is tempted by the devil brings him up to the top of the mountain, and with his temptations about this can all be yours. And we all know Matthew's Sermon on the Mount, and that's where Jesus goes in Matthew's stories to be alone to pray. And we have this story, and we have the crucifixion, which is on a hill or mountaintop. And in Matthew, when he appears to his disciples after the resurrection, it's on a mountaintop. Mountaintop experience. Big event, larger than life. Metaphorically, it gives us the strength to re-energize and come back and start doing the work we're supposed to do. Many of us have had mountaintop experiences where they feel a greater presence. They feel something awe-inspiring. They feel peace and comfort. It doesn't have to be a mountain. It's wherever we get our energy, right? Even if it's a mountain, could be big crowds that we're in. A mountain could be some bright lights or nature or joyful singing or preaching in front of a great congregation. It's to keep us going, these experiences. Don't get up. Don't be afraid. Let's go. I think it's real important in the New Testament story that Moses and Elijah are there, because if you think to the Old Testament, Moses is credited with the first 5 books, the Torah, first 5 books of the Old Testament. And Elijah is the king of the prophets, if you will, and the prophets are responsible for almost the entire rest of the Old Testament. So you've got the entire scriptures represented on that mountain. You have the law and you have the prophets. And that's what the Old Testament has been called. It's been called the book of the law and the prophets, and they were both there. So what they're doing is they're actually giving credence to Jesus being there. They show that Jesus is endorsed by the law and the prophets, by the scripture. We all know how important endorsements are in whatever we want to do. This is a pretty powerful one. And also the fact it's a little part, but they have these 3 witnesses with them. Each of them do for this to see this glory. And it's a law in Leviticus. We all know our Leviticus laws, don't we? Just by the backs of our hands. But it takes 3 witnesses to confirm that something has happened. And later, it's interesting because we've done a Bible study on Paul, and Paul actually brings that up about having witnesses, 3 witnesses. So you've got 2 stories here which sound very similar, and there are some similarities. You know, they both take place over like 6 days, and they both have 3 companions, and it's all both on a mountaintop, and there's shining figures in both of them. And God speaking from a cloud. And it's got a couple of differences which I think are really important. I think this story, there's so much in this New Testament story that I'm hoping we can unfold some here today. In the Old Testament, what was really important is that they built altars there. And they set up stone pillars, and it was news for everyone. He was bringing the news that God was with them to everyone. And Moses stayed up there. Jesus also, his differences are. Peter wanted to build something. Jesus said no. Well, God said no, actually. And he told them to tell no one of the experience. And they were up there for a brief moment, and he came right back down. See, I think this story centers on Peter, and that's a personal thing. I mean, Peter's my guy. Peter is the man of action. He's the one that jumps in. He's the one that jumped off the boat into the water to try to walk on the water with Jesus. He's done a bunch of things. He is Mr. Second Chance. I think that's why I like him so much. Scott one time talked about how all Jewish boys grew up to try to be rabbis. And Peter did not get to be one, but Jesus came by and picked him to be a rabbi. Jesus gave him his second chance. I think I've always loved that about Peter, just kind of jumping in and just being there. And the significance of the 6 days here is that 6 days before this story is when Jesus asked his disciples, who do they say I am? Who do you say I am? And Peter's answered, the Messiah. Ding, 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 he got the points on that one. And then when Jesus talked to him about what he would need to do, that he would need to suffer, and he was going to die on this cross, and he was going to do all this stuff. And Peter rebuked him. He didn't just disagree, he rebuked Jesus and says, no, that's never going to happen. And that's when Jesus got angry back at Peter. So he kind of put Peter in his place back there. So in this story, do you notice he's a little hesitant? He's like, oh, it's good to be here. It's like one of those teams that make it to the Super Bowl like once every 50 years. It's like, oh, I'm really glad to be here. But it's not about just being here. And so he wants to build tents. He's a little tentative going into this. He's not sure how Jesus is going to react. So he comes in softly, but he says, but I'd love to do tents, because he probably knows the story of Moses and the same thing, and they built the big stone pillars. Because I think he thinks this is it. Yeah, he told me 6 days ago he had to go through this suffering, but maybe, look at what's going on here. Maybe this is it. This is the end. And we don't have to go through all that stuff, that suffering, that dying on the cross. This is it. Let's put stakes in the ground here and say, okay, this is where it all ends. Trying to fulfill the scriptures without all the suffering. God was having none of that. Maybe, on the other hand, Peter thinks it's just all temporary, that this is a moment for him too, and he just wants to grab it and put it in a bottle, capture it. I mean, how many of us have done that before? And you come across a moment. I just want to stay here. I just want to stay here. And we've all had those sports moments where we're celebrating after something. We just want to stay in that moment. We don't got to work the next day. So Peter actually realizes the gift and the grace in that same moment. He wants to hold on to it. But that's not what he's allowed to do. Do you notice what happened is God came out and bopped him in the back of the head and said, hey, this is not why we're here. I want you to be present. Be on the one to hear. But I want you to understand that you're with Jesus, my son. And the best quoted thing, listen to him. Listen to Jesus. Peter had the wrong response. I mean, he thought this was for Pete's sake, which is the title of this sermon. For Pete's sake. Because I think that Peter's really thinking that this stuff's kind of for him and the guys. But it wasn't time for speaking or moving or building or anything like that. It was just time to listen. God said, listen, slow down. That's all God wanted him to do. In the Moses story, he gave them the 10 Commandments and he brought it down to the people, and that was the time for action. This time there's no thunder and lightning. There's no trumpet voice. There's no earthquakes. There's no wind. One single voice on the top of this mountain, and it said, listen. Sometimes it's tough to hear that one single voice. Sometimes just there's too much going around us that you can't hear it. Or if you hear it, you don't want to hear it. You don't want to accept it because it's not the right time. It's not the right way. It's not the right company. It's not the right assignment. Do it later. Do it mañana. But we have to learn how to insert our own voice into this silence. And sometimes it's by covering the silence. It's by staying busy and making excuses and doing things. And maybe God needs to pop us on the back of the head too, like he did to Peter. I'm like that constantly. I need to stay busy. And the weekends, if there's nothing that we're doing, I can't sit still. I'm having a tough time sitting still right now. But busy is kind of a mechanism to try to gain control, sometimes of an out of control situation. And how many times have you watched a football game and you're like, oh, I can't control that, but maybe this is good luck and I'll do this. And Joe, go to the bathroom. When you go to the bathroom, they always score a touchdown. You know, it's doing something like that. Now, don't mistake busyness for like ambition or effectiveness, because I stay busy on the weekends, but to do stuff, you should see my garage. It's not like I've got a clean garage and everything, so it's really not result driven. And there was a time for action with Peter. There's also a time to listen, to reflect, to meditate, to dialogue. When I did this sermon originally 3 months ago, there was no concern about pandemics. There were no protests going on. There was no awareness of our racial injustice that was going on. Obviously it was going on. We weren't as aware of it as we are now. And the fighting in political parties. There's a lot of noise going on right now. You've got to find time to listen, reflect, meditate, and dialogue. It's in the calm and the quiet of listening where the truth comes out. Our challenge is to listen for him. Not Peter. Peter wanted to build a tent. He wanted to memorialize the moment. I always mess up that word. He wanted to hold on to it. He wanted it for Pete's sake. I know we do this in other ways too. It's the reason why we take videos and we take selfies and we get autographs from stars, and we're trying to hold on to the moment. There's a story about my younger brother, Chris, when we were visiting him one time, and my two daughters were in the car with him. This was in Massachusetts, and they're going down the road, and they see these wild turkeys running around on the side of the road. And it happens all the time out there. But the girls stopped pulling out their phones, and my brother started saying, because he makes fun of it all the time, it's like you people, I swear, it doesn't happen unless you record it. And I can't believe that you can't look with your eyes, and as he's turning around they're holding it and they're recording. And they play it back, and there's this rant by my brother about how everything has to be recorded, and they're recording it. It was just this really funny kind of looking in the mirror moment. That's for Pete's sake, holding on to things like that. And then it gets a little worse for Peter, unfortunately. Next thing Jesus says is, don't tell anyone. These guys must have been going crazy. They just saw the most amazing thing in their entire lives, and they heard God's voice. He says, don't tell anybody. But with good reason. Jesus had a lot of this journey to still go through. It's the light of Easter that he gets proclaimed, that this happens for everybody else to see. But he needed to go through the suffering, the death, the resurrection. And if this story got out, people would be just focused on that, and nothing could get done. People would get distracted, and they wouldn't be able to follow Jesus to the glory of the cross like we can today. The expectations would have been completely different for Jesus then. It would change the disciples' mission too. All of a sudden, it would allow society to dictate their actions as opposed to them being leaders. Instead, get up. Don't be afraid. Let's go. And they leave that place. And they go down the hill, and the first thing they do is they see a father with a very sick child who needs curing. And the disciples cure him. Disciples and Jesus cure the sick child. That would not have happened. That was their work to do. That would not have happened if they came around and said, oh, you should see what we just saw. And this is all just the right time for Jesus. It's basically right in the middle of his ministry. He's got a lot to go. He's done a lot. But he needs this. And you all know how this happens. You're tired, and people are seeking you out for help, and you have other people criticizing you, and some people supporting you, and you're trying to play the middle ground, and it's feeling about dread about what lies ahead, because he's got a lot that lies ahead. This is a great moment for Jesus to re-energize, to recharge those spiritual batteries of his for the next phase he has to go to. Like I said, in this story, this is the beginning of February. It's right before Lent starts, this story, which is great for us because it's a great transfiguration time for us. It's an invitation for us to recharge and get ready for the season of Lent. So feel free to play this again right before Lent next year. So it's for our sake too, and for Pete's sake. And he had that moment, certainly did, and then it's back to work. So he just touched them, afterwards. Healing, strengthening, comforting touch that Jesus has. Get up. Don't be afraid. Let's go. It's time to go heal and teach and suffer. He asks us to do the same thing. Get up. Don't be afraid. Let's go. Even in these times. This story is an invitation to us to join his followers, to look at who we are, who we can become, and who we can be together. No better time than what's going on right now. Don't get caught up in the big lights and the big glory. Take some time, let go of our egos and our worries, our self-imposed limitations, and open up, listen, dialogue. This is a quote by a great philosopher. Says, the less impressed we are with our accomplishments and careers and become more involved with each other, the sooner we get a whole lot better as people. Now, of course, that great philosopher was Matthew McConaughey, so it just shows you it can come from anywhere. But we seem to be constantly being called into new and unforeseen circumstances, can't we? I mean, just the last couple of months. Sometimes we feel not quite ready. We like to hold on to that familiar. We like to build that tent. We like to put in those stakes. I just want to go back to normal. Ha ha ha. Being out of our comfort zone is good sometimes. You know, when I was living in California, we joined this Presbyterian church, and they were doing Godspell on stage. The pastors had a background in a theatrical education, and for me, I'm like, I'll just like be behind here and behind the camera and do the lights and stuff like that. It says, no, we want you up on stage with stuff, and that was my first experience on stage, and you can't get me off now. You know, being out of our comfort zone can really help us grow in certain ways. So we're called into Transfiguration to offer it to the whole world. Not as glorious people, not as overseeing everything, but using what we have, using our powers to make things more apparent, to be a voice for those who can't have a voice. More helpful to simply be human beings who offer a healing and a life-giving touch to the scared, the worried, the anxious, anybody that we contact. It's just not like Peter running around and keeping busy. We need to have the purpose. We need to have those spiritual eyes for the glory that manifests in our daily lives. It's all overwhelming. We know it is. Everything we're going through right now is overwhelming. But listen to him. Listen for him. Listen to each other. Get up. Don't be afraid. Let's go, for Pete's sake. Amen.